Was Jezebel truly the embodiment of evil as portrayed in biblical texts, or a powerful woman scapegoated for maintaining her cultural identity? Did the biblical writers deliberately craft a villain to serve their theological narrative, or was she genuinely responsible for religious persecution? What if the story had been written by Phoenician scribes rather than Hebrew prophets? Would Jezebel be remembered as a hero defending religious freedom instead of a villain? Jezebel was born a Phoenician princess, daughter of King Ethbal of Tyre, who himself was a priest of Astarte before seizing power. Her marriage to King Ahab was a diplomatic alliance that brought unprecedented prosperity to the northern kingdom of Israel. Though reviled in biblical accounts, archaeological evidence suggests the reign of Ahab and Jezebel marked a period of architectural advancement and economic prosperity. The story of Jezebel begins not with a woman, but with an international political alliance. When King Ahab of Israel married the Phoenician princess Jezebel, daughter of King Ethbal of Tyre, he was following a well-established tradition of diplomatic marriages. What made this union extraordinary was not the marriage itself, but the cultural and religious earthquake it triggered in ancient Israel. Jezebel arrived in Israel not merely as a foreign bride, but as a devoted priestess of Baal and Asherah. Unlike previous foreign consorts who typically adopted the religion of their new homeland, Jezebel maintained her religious identity with unprecedented determination. She brought with her hundreds of prophets and priests of Baal and established temples and altars throughout Israel. This wasn't merely personal piety. It represented a direct challenge to the worship of Yahweh in a land that, according to biblical narrative, was meant to be devoted exclusively to the Hebrew God. The religious conflict that ensued was not simply theological but deeply political. The 9th century BCE was a period of regional power struggles, with Assyria rising in the east and Egypt maintaining influence in the south. Israel's position was precarious, and alignment with the powerful Phoenician trading empire through marriage made strategic sense. The worship of Baal, associated with fertility, rain, and agricultural prosperity, had practical appeal in an agrarian society. Many Israelites likely saw no contradiction in worshiping both Yahweh and Baal, a religious syncretism common throughout the ancient Near East. What made the situation explosive was the emergence of a more exclusive form of Yahwism, championed by prophets like Elijah, who insisted on monotheistic worship. When Elijah dramatically challenged the prophets of Baal to a supernatural contest on Mount Carmel, calling down fire from heaven to consume a sacrifice, he was not merely performing a miracle, but staging a public referendum on religious identity. The biblical account describes how he subsequently ordered the slaughter of 450 prophets of Baal, an act of religious violence that modern readers might find deeply troubling, but which the text presents as divinely sanctioned. Jezebel's response was equally severe. The biblical text accuses her of persecuting and killing the prophets of Yahweh, forcing them into hiding. While these accounts may be exaggerated for rhetorical effect, they reflect the intensity of the religious conflict. Jezebel was likely protecting her own religious freedom rather than simply persecuting others out of malice. Archaeological evidence offers a more nuanced picture than the biblical accounts. Numerous small female figurines found throughout Israelite homes from this period suggest that the worship of Asherah, often considered Baal's consort, was widespread among ordinary Israelites. Inscriptions referring to Yahweh and his Asherah indicate that many Israelites saw no contradiction in worshiping both deities. The religious landscape of ancient Israel was far more complex than the strictly monotheistic picture painted by later biblical editors. The conflict between Jezebel and the prophets represented more than a power struggle. It was a clash between different conceptions of divinity, gender, and cultural identity. Baal worship included female deities and priestesses, giving women a more prominent religious role than in traditional Yahwism. Jezebel's religious practices threatened not just theological orthodoxy but patriarchal social structures. The story reached its dramatic climax in the vineyard of Naboth. When a citizen refused to sell his ancestral land to King Ahab, Jezebel orchestrated a false trial resulting in Naboth's execution. This incident, more than any other, cemented her reputation for wickedness. Yet even here, cultural differences may have played a role. In Phoenician royal tradition, monarchs had absolute authority over property, while Israelite law protected ancestral land rights. What Jezebel may have seen as exercising royal prerogative, Israelite tradition viewed as tyrannical overreach. This incident prompted Elijah to deliver his most chilling prophecy: that dogs would lick up Jezebel's blood and devour her flesh, leaving nothing to bury, a denial of proper funeral rites considered horrific in the ancient world. The prophecy would be fulfilled years later when Jezebel was thrown from a window and trampled by horses during Jehu's coup, her body consumed by scavenging dogs. The religious conflict embodied in Jezebel's story continues to resonate in contemporary discussions about religious pluralism, cultural assimilation, and the relationship between faith and state power. Was Jezebel a defender of religious freedom fighting against monotheistic intolerance? Or was she an oppressor imposing foreign customs on a nation with its own sacred traditions? The answer depends largely on one's perspective, highlighting how religious narratives are never neutral, but always embedded in political and cultural contexts. What makes Jezebel's story so compelling is that beneath the theological conflicts lie universal human themes: the tension between tradition and change, the challenges of cultural integration, and the often violent consequences when religious identity becomes entangled with political power. Far from being merely a villain in an ancient text, Jezebel stands as a complex figure whose story continues to challenge our assumptions about power, gender, and religious authority. The story of Jezebel transcends religious conflict to reveal profound tensions about female power in the ancient world. As a Phoenician princess in Israel, Jezebel occupied an extraordinary position at the intersection of gender, foreign influence, and political authority, a combination that proved explosive in the patriarchal society of ancient Israel. Phoenician culture differed significantly from Israelite society in its attitudes toward women in power. Archaeological evidence suggests that women in Phoenician city-states like Tyre enjoyed relatively higher status, with some serving as priestesses and even wielding political influence. Jezebel likely arrived in Israel with expectations of authority that clashed dramatically with Israelite gender norms, where women, while sometimes influential, rarely exercised direct political power. The biblical text reveals Jezebel's exceptional influence through subtle yet telling details. When King Ahab sulked after Naboth refused to sell his vineyard, it was Jezebel who declared, "Is this how you act as king over Israel? Get up and eat. Cheer up. I'll get you the vineyard of Naboth." This statement reveals not just her willingness to act decisively but an implicit criticism of her husband's leadership. Her subsequent actions, writing letters in Ahab's name and sealing them with his seal, demonstrate her comfort with exercising royal authority directly, a profound transgression of gender boundaries in ancient Israel. The Hebrew Bible contains few examples of women wielding such direct political power, and those who do, like Queen Athaliah, who ruled Judah for 6 years, are invariably portrayed negatively. Jezebel's agency threatened the patriarchal order by demonstrating that a woman could effectively exercise royal authority. Perhaps more threatening still, she showed no deference to male prophetic authority, openly defying Elijah and threatening his life. The biblical writer's emphasis on Jezebel's appearance in her final moments speaks volumes about ancient attitudes toward powerful women. As Jehu's coup unfolds and he approaches the palace, Jezebel painted her eyes, arranged her hair, and looked out of a window. This final act has been interpreted in wildly different ways, as vanity, as dignified preparation for death, or as an attempt to seduce her killer. Most compelling is the interpretation that Jezebel was donning her full royal regalia, the ancient equivalent of putting on a crown and royal robes, to meet death as a queen rather than a defeated enemy. The text's emphasis on her violent death and the consumption of her body by dogs seems calculated to erase not just Jezebel but the very idea of female royal authority. Only her skull, hands, and feet remained, the very emblems of her power: head for thought, hands for action, destroyed. This graphically violent end serves as a warning about the consequences of female power unchecked by male authority. Intriguingly, despite the text's attempt to vilify her, Jezebel displays qualities that would be praised in male rulers: loyalty to her cultural heritage, decisive action, and courage in the face of death. When she calls Jehu a murderer of his master from her window, she demonstrates a fierce loyalty to her husband's dynasty even when it would have been politically expedient to switch allegiance. Her refusal to flee or hide, instead facing her killer with dignity, reveals a courage that transcends gender expectations. Modern scholars have noted how Jezebel's portrayal follows classic patterns of demonizing powerful foreign women. She is characterized as sexually dangerous, though no actual sexual misconduct is attributed to her in the text, religiously corrupting, and culturally contaminating. These same tropes appear repeatedly throughout history when societies feel threatened by powerful women, especially those from outside cultures. The biblical writers never acknowledge Jezebel's perspective or motivations beyond attributing malice to her actions. We never hear her voice directly except in brief, often defiant statements. This silencing is itself a political act, denying her the opportunity to justify her actions or explain her beliefs. Archaeological evidence suggests that literacy was rare among women in ancient Israel, meaning the written record was controlled almost exclusively by men, many of whom were associated with religious institutions hostile to Jezebel's influence. Feminist interpretations have reclaimed Jezebel as a symbol of female resistance to patriarchal religious authority. While such readings might impose modern values on an ancient text, they highlight how the demonization of powerful women transcends historical periods. The very qualities that made Jezebel threatening, her refusal to abandon her identity, her exercise of political power, her challenge to religious orthodoxy, are precisely what make her compelling to contemporary readers seeking examples of female agency in ancient texts. Whether viewed as villain or victim, Jezebel forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about how societies respond to women who refuse to conform to prescribed gender roles. Her story reveals how threats to the gender order become intertwined with religious and national identity, often resulting in violent backlash. The fact that Jezebel remains a potent insult for sexually assertive or powerful women demonstrates how ancient gender politics continue to shape contemporary attitudes. In the final analysis, Jezebel's greatest transgression may not have been her foreign religion or her political influence, but her refusal to accept the limitations placed on women in Israelite society. By claiming the right to exercise power directly rather than through male intermediaries, she challenged not just theological orthodoxy but the very foundations of patriarchal authority, a challenge that apparently required not just her death but the complete destruction of her body to resolve. Few biblical figures have left a legacy as enduring and controversial as Jezebel's. Her name has transcended its historical context to become a powerful symbol in Western culture, literature, and religious discourse. The evolution of Jezebel's image over 3 millennia reveals as much about changing attitudes toward female power and foreign influence as it does about the historical queen herself. In the immediate aftermath of her death, Jezebel's legacy was deliberately erased through acts of physical and cultural destruction. King Jehu, who orchestrated her murder, systematically eliminated Baal worship from Israel, destroying temples and killing priests. This physical erasure paralleled the textual vilification that would solidify her reputation for generations to come. The biblical writers crafted her story not merely as historical record but as a cautionary tale about the dangers of foreign religious influence and female authority unchecked by proper male guidance. The Hebrew Bible's portrayal of Jezebel established a template for female wickedness that would influence Western civilization for millennia. The name Jezebel appears in the New Testament's book of Revelation as a byword for false prophecy and sexual immorality, though the reference likely had nothing to do with the historical queen. This association with sexual promiscuity is particularly ironic since the biblical text never actually accuses the historical Jezebel of sexual misconduct. Her harlotries and witchcraft mentioned in 2 Kings are metaphorical references to idolatry rather than literal prostitution or sorcery. Early Christian writers expanded on Jezebel's negative portrayal, transforming her into an archetype of feminine evil. Church fathers like Tertullian and Jerome cited her as evidence of women's capacity for wickedness and used her story to argue against female leadership in religious contexts. During the European witch hunts of the 16th and 17th centuries, Jezebel was frequently invoked as a biblical precedent for female religious deviancy deserving violent punishment. The 19th century brought a fascinating transformation in Jezebel's cultural image. Victorian writers, fascinated by the exotic Orient, reimagined Jezebel as the quintessential femme fatale, beautiful, seductive, and dangerous. Paintings from this era typically portrayed her with elaborate makeup and revealing clothing, despite the absence of such details in the biblical text. This sexualized Jezebel reflected Victorian anxieties about female sexuality more than historical reality. It was during this period that Jezebel became firmly established as a slur against sexually forward women, a usage that continues to the present day. The 20th century witnessed the beginning of scholarly reassessment of Jezebel's historical context. Archaeological discoveries in the ancient Near East provided evidence of Phoenician religious practices and social structures, allowing historians to place Jezebel's actions within their proper cultural framework. These findings suggested that rather than being uniquely wicked, Jezebel was acting in accordance with the religious and political expectations of her native culture. The development of literary and historical criticism revealed the political and theological agendas shaping biblical narratives, encouraging readers to look beyond the text's surface condemnation. Feminist biblical scholars have been particularly influential in reinterpreting Jezebel's story. Writers like Phyllis Tribble and Judith Oakeshorn have highlighted how Jezebel's portrayal reflects ancient patriarchal fears of female authority rather than objective historical assessment. They note that qualities condemned in Jezebel, decisiveness, political acumen, religious devotion, would likely have been praised in male rulers. This feminist reclamation has transformed Jezebel from villain to victim of patriarchal propaganda, or even to proto-feminist hero resisting religious oppression. In contemporary popular culture, Jezebel has become a complex symbol with multiple, sometimes contradictory, meanings. The name has been reclaimed by some feminist publications and organizations as a badge of defiance against patriarchal constraints on female behavior. Musicians, authors, and filmmakers have reinterpreted her story from perspectives sympathetic to the Queen, emphasizing her courage and cultural integrity rather than her supposed wickedness. At the same time, conservative religious voices continue to invoke Jezebel as a warning against religious syncretism and female leadership outside properly sanctioned channels. African American feminist scholars have offered particularly nuanced analyses of how the Jezebel stereotype has been weaponized against Black women throughout American history. The label was used to portray enslaved women as sexually promiscuous, justifying their exploitation and rape. This racialized deployment of the Jezebel trope reveals how biblical narratives can be manipulated to reinforce not just gender but racial hierarchies. What makes Jezebel's legacy so enduring is its adaptability to different cultural contexts and concerns. For religious conservatives, she remains a powerful symbol of the dangers of abandoning traditional faith and gender roles. For feminists, she represents female resistance to patriarchal religious authority. For post-colonial scholars, her story illustrates how indigenous religious practices are demonized by dominant cultures. For literary critics, she demonstrates the power of narrative to shape historical memory. Perhaps the most profound aspect of Jezebel's legacy is her dramatic death scene. Her final moments, painting her eyes, arranging her hair, confronting her killer with defiant words, have captured the imagination of artists and writers for centuries. Even in a text determined to condemn her, Jezebel's courage shines through. She faced death not with repentance or fear but with dignity and defiance, maintaining her royal identity to the last breath. This powerful image of a woman refusing to be diminished even in defeat transcends the biblical writer's intent, offering an enduring symbol of female courage in the face of overwhelming patriarchal violence. The evolution of Jezebel's image from one-dimensional villain to complex cultural icon reflects broader societal changes in attitudes toward women, religious difference, and cultural diversity. As we continue to grapple with questions of religious tolerance, female leadership, and cross-cultural understanding, Jezebel's story remains surprisingly relevant. Her legacy challenges us to look beyond simplistic moral judgments to consider how power, gender, religion, and cultural identity shape our understanding of historical and contemporary figures who dare to defy prevailing norms.